You know how we Bond fans grumble about the length of time in between new Bond movies being released these days? Well, it really does put those grumblings into perspective when there's a new Indiana Jones film in cinemas. In the gap between 2008's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and 2023's Dial of Destiny, we have had the entirety of the MCU, we have had 2 reboots of Spider-Man films in that time, and we've had 4 Bond films, and you know how infrequently they come out, so the fact that we had 4 Bond films in between new Indiana Jones releases is saying something. I've covered all the Indiana Jones films on this channel previously. The original trilogy is a trio of films very close to my heart. I'm one of those people who grew up with these films. I have super fond memories of watching them with my dad when I was a kid, and we had the VHS set, and they were super worn out by the time we upgraded to the DVDs. We watched them so much, absolutely adore those films to this day. And believe it or not, I also have very positive memories attached to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I remember being super jazzed when that came out. I remember liking it enough too when I saw it at the cinema, and then I ended up disliking it when I started getting on board with all of the internet hate, and now I've kind of come back around on it in recent days. I think it's okay, I think it's fun enough, but not touching the original trilogy in terms of quality. So Dial of Destiny had its premiere at Cannes, and the initial reviews were fairly poor leaning, I would say, and the sort of critical view of it up until its proper release seemed to be incredibly lukewarm. I don't know, I don't feel like there has been a positive buzz around this film at all. And now having seen the film myself, I think that that's an incredible shame, because I had an absolute blast with this thing. I came out of the cinema feeling really good, like I'd just seen a wonderful adventure with a good amount of heart that genuinely touched me in a few places, and I just had so many thoughts about this film. I was like, oh my god, I've got so much that I need and want to talk about with this. So if you've seen the film, please do let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. I'm saying this up top just because I want to get out of the way that the first bit of this review is going to be spoiler free, and then I will give you plenty of warning when I'm going to get into some spoiler territory. So yeah, if you haven't seen the film, probably not a good idea to be scrolling down to the comment section, but for the next few minutes, you'll be fine. Before I talk about the cast and the story, I do want to start by talking about the director, because this is obviously the first Indiana Jones film that we have without Steven Spielberg directing. And I'll be honest, when I first heard that news, when that news first broke that Spielberg wasn't going to be doing this, he was going to be replaced with someone else, I was so apprehensive, my heart sank. I thought it was such a shame that this was always going to be the very last Indiana Jones film, unless we have a 95-year-old Harrison Ford coming out of retirement in 15 years. But I think it's safe to say that this is the last one. And I thought it was such a shame that one of the, I would say, core individuals, Harrison Ford, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, it would be a shame that one of the key elements of that wouldn't be here for this film. And then in a similar vein, looking at the credits for this film, George Lucas doesn't have a story credit. This is the first Indy film without such a credit for the man. So without those two of, I would say, the main trio of creatives in charge of, what Indiana Jones is, it very much falls on Harrison Ford. Like, this is Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny as far as I'm concerned. Having seen so many of the interviews that he's doing around the press of this film, and how much this character means to him, I love that he really does care about this character, evidently. I mean, you compare his interviews from Indiana Jones to his interviews about Star Wars, I mean, it's chalk and cheese. And I really love that he's had this opportunity to say goodbye to the character, really. When it comes to James Mangold, he's a director, I've seen plenty of his stuff. I like Logan an awful lot. I liked Identity, the sort of serial killer thriller that he made many years ago. But his name alone is not a selling point for me. Like, if there's a new James Mangold film out in the cinema, I don't go to see it like I would do a Steven Spielberg film. And yet, as I say, I do appreciate that we get to have a different director's take on what an Indiana Jones film is, and I think that he's actually a really good fit here. There's very much a difference between his approach to Steven Spielberg's approach. There is much more of a sense of melancholy to this film that might rub some people up the wrong way. I feel like there's still a good balance between some of the more heartfelt, melancholic stuff, some of the thematic stuff, and the, rip-roaring adventures, the gags and all that kind of stuff. I think that it's very nicely perfectly balanced, but even just comparing it with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which feels so kind of irreverent and carefree in nature when compared with this one. And I think that that's what perhaps resonated with me the most about Dial of Destiny. I feel like not since Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade have I been so touched, and I came out with a wonderful sort of heartfelt feeling after Dial of Destiny, which the other Indy films have never given me that. Harrison Ford himself is just wonderful. It's an absolute joy to see him back in this role, in that costume, doing this whole routine again. And they have advanced him. Like, he is like, he will have been in his late 70s when they were making this, and you can't hide away from that. Obviously, they need to make some comments about his age and whatnot. And I do think, again, I think that the balance is just right. Like, you don't feel too much like he is old man Indy being sort of dragged out of retirement for one last adventure. But the action sequences, I feel, are very constructed around the fact that, yeah, you know what, he's probably not going to be doing as much of the physical stuff as he used to. If you were to get in, stunt doubles, I don't know how believable it would be if, Harrison Ford was doing some of the stunts that Indy used to do. So I think some of the action sequences, he's behind the wheel of vehicles a couple of times, and I feel like that's a very conscious thing. It's a way of having some fast-paced action without him actually having to be terribly physical, like, he's just driving along. But I think what they do with the character, there's a real rich theme running throughout the film about the past and history and what it means to be in the present. And I love that the backdrop of this film is against it's set in the late 60s, and the moon landing is very much in the news. There's it's a big thing, like, he's still doing his lecturing, he's still, into his archaeology and history and everything, but all the characters around him, the younger people, are so much more interested in the future and what's happening right now, and the moon landing, this big scientific triumph, that's taking everyone's attention, and they're not really bothered about, his history lesson, basically. So he feels displaced in a way that I don't feel like I've seen since Last Crusade. I feel like there's a wonderful scene in that where all of his students are harassing him, and he goes into his office and then he sort of sneaks out the back. Like, I like that. I like the sense that Indy doesn't feel entirely at home in a very real world setting. I think that this is a really satisfying final chapter for the character. It's, I'll get into more of the specifics when I get into the spoilery part of talking about the film, but overall, I was so thrilled and happy with how everything wrapped up for the guy. I was, very pleased. So second to Harrison Ford in this film, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is here as Indy's goddaughter. Very curious choice. Obviously, again, Bond connection. She wrote a bit of No Time to Die, and I mainly know her from, TV stuff, really, like Fleabag I watched and really like. I don't think of her as a movie star, and that's probably because, she hasn't had that many starring movie roles. So there is something that felt a bit odd for me seeing her next to Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford is just like, he's oozes charisma. He is just a movie star. Like, you put him on the big screen and it just works. Whereas I did have a moment where I was sat there watching this on a pretty big screen. I didn't see it in IMAX, but it was a big screen. And just seeing Phoebe Waller-Bridge's face up there was just so odd. In a way that, like, if you put my face on a 60-foot screen or whatever, it would look weird. Like, some people just have the movie star quality about them, which is what makes them movie stars. I think Sean Connery is another example of that. I think Daniel Craig is another example of that. Steve McQueen, that kind of actor. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I don't know if she's in that same quality as, as you might expect from an Indiana Jones co-star. And yet, in a meta way, I think it might work, because the sense of her feeling so displaced, like she doesn't belong here, kind of works in a way, because, Indy, so much of the story is about whether or not he belongs in this modern world and whatnot. So maybe her casting was a kind of a meta thing. I don't know, but I liked her character in this story. There were a few moments where I felt she maybe got a little... I felt like I was watching Fleabag the movie. There's one scene in particular where they're on a boat. I think people will know which one I'm referring to. If you've seen the film, she's doing a lot of talking through that scene, and that felt like... I expected her to do her Fleabag character thing and turn to the camera at any moment. But I still thought she was a fun character, and I think that she had the right kind of vibe for this kind of rollicking adventure. There's also another character who I don't remember seeing much in the promotional material, Teddy, who is a kid with, he follows... Indy and Phoebe WallerBridge along for this adventure. I guess he's supposed to be the short round of the film, basically. He's the kid's sidekick, and I remember when I saw Temple of Doom, I really liked Short Round because I was a similar age to Short Round, and I don't know if he is there for the kid audience to sort of have some relatable figure on screen. I thought that the actor did a good job. I just don't think that the character ever really has a good moment to make an impact. I think of Short Round as such a, he's so energetic and such a wonderful charisma. He's a really fun character in that film. And Teddy, I felt, was just a little dull in comparison, I guess. I don't think that's the fault of the actor, but towards the end of the film as well, he feels more like he's there as a plot device than anything else. And now we come to another big Bond connection, Mads Mikkelsen as the main villain of the film, and Mads is just becoming one of my favourite all-time actors. I just absolutely love the guy in everything I see in him. And a few months ago I saw Another Round, which I thought he was amazing in. I loved that film. I loved him as Hannibal. Everything I've seen him in, he's never a problem. I think he's a phenomenal presence, just a brilliant actor, and he's perfect here. He's that perfect level of, he's not hamming it up, I don't think, but he has a very outrageous character to play on the page, and I think he just plays it with just the pitch perfect level of sincerity and just a slight tongue-in-cheek, like there's just a little bit of gnawing of the scenery every once in a while, but in a subdued way, and he's menacing. I think he's a really effective indie villain. John RhysDavies is back as Salah, which I'm just overjoyed about. Like, seeing him back on screen as that character was such a delight, and he actually, there was a moment with him that I felt was so lovely. I found myself welling up with tears in the cinema. There's this one interaction that he has with Indy that I just thought was so lovely. He's a very small part. He doesn't have all that much to do in terms of the plot, but I thought he was a wonderful, just so lovely to see him back on screen in this part. So I think the cast are uniformly wonderful, and I think that the story is it's a classic Indiana Jones story. It has its MacGuffin. It has him going, A to B to C to D. It kind of hits all the beats that you would want it to. There is the, Raiders has snakes, Temple of Doom has the bugs, Last Crusade has the rats, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has the ants. This film does have its own sort of creepy, I won't spoil what it is, but they do have their sinister animal sequence, which I thought was quite good, actually, and a really nice play on some of Indy's fears. I will say that I think that the film is just a little bit too long. There were a couple of moments where I was a little bit kind of, I just kind of want this to get on with it now and come to the climax, but I thought that all of the action sequences were an awful lot of fun. The whole sort of vehicle chase sequence in the middle of the film, I thought was really well done, very effective. It's one of those things where you with an indie film, it's like, particularly in an action sequence in the middle of the film, I know that Indy's not going to die or anything like that. It's not a sense of peril for the hero, but in indie action sequences, there's always just so much invention and charm and wit about them, and I think that this film carries that tradition forward in a really nice way. However, if I do have one sort of major-ish sort of bugbear with the film, it is what I would say, overuse of obvious CGI, I think. And in the action sequences, you can kind of forgive it in a way. Like, I think that they do enough stuff for real that you can tell that they're actually on the location and they're doing this for real. Yeah, sure, I don't expect them to send Harrison Ford in a tuk-tuk taxi going like 80 miles an hour down some street in Tangier without maybe a little bit of rear screen projection going on. But there are a lot of sequences where it was mainly in just the dialogue sequences when it's a character like in an outside location and they're just having a one-on-one. I don't know if that a chunk of the reasoning for this is because they were filming this. There will have been COVID safety measures in place still, so I don't know if that would have affected which live locations they could go to. Obviously, this film is set in 1969, so allowances needs to be some CGI work taken into account to remove modern buildings and whatnot. In the end, the film does end up having a bit of a artificial sort of look and feel to it. Like, there are times where I felt like I'm watching the animated adventures of Indiana Jones, the very nicely rendered animated adventures of Indiana Jones, but animated nonetheless. And, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, when it first came out, got a lot of stick for what people then referred to as an overuse of CGI, and I feel like there's, probably a lot more going on in Dial of Destiny than there was in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But even in, like, one of those earlier sequences of that film where Indy and Shire are having a vehicle chase around in Indy's workplace and stuff, like, so much of that was done for real, and you can tell, and it has a real sense of reality to it. I suppose it would be easier for them to make up an old-looking university as being set in the past than it would New York, where a good chunk of this film is set, and, okay, but like I say, there was a sense of artificiality to the film that I found slightly off-putting. Okay, I'm going to get into some spoilery territory from this point onwards, so if you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend pausing this video, going and seeing the film, and then coming back and finishing the video. Just while we're talking about the visual effects and the CGI, obviously I can't carry on without talking about some of the de-aging stuff that goes on in this film, which I thought for the most part was incredible. And I was skeptical going in about it, but I'm actually really glad that they did it. The first, pretty much half an hour of the film is this huge action sequence. It's sort of the tail end of World War II. It's Indy and his friend, played by Toby Jones, who I think is really good in this film as well, and they're fighting Nazis and, they're after an object. And Harrison Ford is de-aged with this. He looks much like he did in The Last Crusade, and barring a couple of shots where there's just the occasional moment where I had a similar thing with Peter Cushing in Rogue One, where there's just every now and then there is just that little rubberiness. You can just tell that it's not real. But what I love about the use of the technology in this instance is that I feel like it, really gave us a real classic feeling Indiana Jones action sequence, like what we would have seen if they'd have made a film in, the early 1990s, for instance. Like, that is the kind of sequence. Obviously, there's an abundance of CGI in play in this particular film, but otherwise I felt like the quality of the filmmaking, it just had that, I feel like it had that Spielbergian quality to it in such a wonderful way. And I just love that we have this little mini episode, basically, this little mini Indiana Jones adventure with a young Indy. It's just so cool. I feel like James Mangold's directorial touch becomes very evident when we move into in the film's present day, 1969, and he does do a few things that I don't think Spielberg would ever do. A couple of Indy's colleagues are murdered in cold blood early on in the film, and that was it was a really brutal moment that I don't think Spielberg would have done. I think that there is a darkness to this film that previously we've only really seen in Temple of Doom. But for such innocent, well-meaning, perfectly nice characters to be killed in such a way, executed essentially, I thought was, this is the gloves are off kind of thing. James Mangold is not going to have that same overly sentimental sensibility that I think Steven Spielberg had with Indy. And yet I feel like the film has an awful lot of heart to it and an awful lot of sentimentality, really. Or at least it did for me. There were a couple of moments where I was just like, actually, no, there were 3 moments where I was tearing up. One, with John RhysDavies, he drives Indy to the airport and he has his dialogue about missing the sand and the desert and the sea and all that kind of stuff, and he really wants to come along with Indy for this adventure, and there was something about that sequence that just, it really gave me goosebumps, and I was just kind of welling up. You really got just a sense of just, Salah's an old guy in this film, and he's so keen to be on this adventure. And Indy says no, he needs to stay here and everything. I did wonder if this was going to be set up for John Rhys-Davies popping up later on during the adventure in some way, becoming useful. But then I'm kind of like, okay, well, actually, maybe one last adventure isn't for everyone. And Salah does look older than Indy here, and he is kind of, I don't know if the actor is older or younger, but he's kind of like hobbling around. He still has such a wonderful bombacity to him that comes through really nicely, but also a frail sense as well. So while on the one hand I think it's a shame that he didn't come along for the adventure in some way, on the other hand I kind of like that he does stay behind, but he does pop up again at the end, which I thought was a lovely surprise. The second time I got emotional was where they address, like, God, I can't believe that I got emotional about this looking back at Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but they do address why Indy's son, Shia LaBeouf, is not here, and I was stunned that they touched on it. I just thought they were going to sweep it under the rug, never happened kind of thing. But no, he went to war and died, and that's what caused a rift between Indy and Marion that has led to their separation. And I thought Harrison Ford was fantastic in that sequence, and I was tearing up, and I was like, I don't even care about Mutt Williams. I thought he was, one of the most sort of controversial elements of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And here I am, like, he's killed off screen in a way that is, I don't even think there's an image of him in this film. They do have plenty of imagery of Marion, of Karen Allen, throughout the film. Indy has a little picture of her on his fridge and whatnot, but I don't think there's an image of Shia. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. So I love it. We're not even going to pay the actor to use his likeness, presumably. And yet we are going to use his character, the death of his character, to give Indy this emotional moment, which, like I say, I thought was lovely. I thought Harrison played it superbly, and again, like, I couldn't believe I was getting moved by the off-screen death of a character that I never much cared for to begin with, but just how Ford plays it and how it has affected him and his life. Really strong stuff. I thought it was great. And the last moment of the film that really did move me, Karen Allen reappearing as Marion Ravenwood. This had been spoiled for me previously. Like, I knew that she was going to be in the film, but I didn't know in what capacity. Like, her and Indy being broken up was kind of a surprise to me going into the film, because I kind of expected, okay, they're still going to be married and he's going to have dialogue with her about, I'm going on my adventure, and she's like, oh, okay, fine. I thought she would be that role. The fact that so much of this film is about whether or not, they're going to get back together, and then she comes back at the end, and they redo the kiss here thing from Raiders, which was so lovely. I thought it was so charming and sweet, and I know that it's just a repeat of something that we've seen before. I know that it's probably playing into everyone's nostalgia in that moment, but just seeing these two actors just replaying those same beats from a movie that is, what, at this point, 42 years old, and they're older, and you can see it in their faces. Like, it really did something for me. I thought it was a perfectly lovely, happy ending for Indy, and then the final shot where he picks up the hat from the clothes line. I thought it was beautiful and brilliant, and yeah, I loved it. Okay, let's talk about something that I think is going to be a fairly big talking point when people are just sort of openly talking about spoilers for this film, but time travel being the main MacGuffin. Like, they're after this device, this thing that Archimedes had, and they do indeed travel back in time to, like, ancient Greece. I was a little bit like, I was in the cinema, like, fairly late on a weekday watching this, so there weren't that many people there. I think maybe like 20 people in total. I couldn't see that many people, mostly behind me, but there were 3 people in front of me to my left, and I could only really see sort of a bit of the face of one of them. And when it became clear that they were back in time, and you were seeing these, ancient Greek people, like, fighting with swords and arrows and stuff, I saw the guy just go, like, he just head in his sort of, hands, like, furrowing his brow kind of thing. And I thought that was like, oh, okay, some people are really not going to be very happy about this. And I can see why. Initially, I thought it was super jarring. I was like, what on earth are they doing? And then it is one of those things where it's like, I remember having a similar reaction with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when it was aliens, and then you sort of think like, well, this is a world where they have God in a box and, you know, a grail goblet that you can live forever. A man can rip a man's heart out of his chest and then it's, you know, he's still alive and, you know, can be sacrificed. So, whatever. Time travel, fine. I also don't think I ever really got my head around how the time travel actually works. Like, because they spend so long looking for these, you know, this device, and then they put it together and it's this thing, and then they fly into the clouds and there's a hole that takes them like 2,000 years previously. I was a bit like, I don't quite know how that works, but you know what, I was fine rolling with it. And I think, again, just how it like fit into, you know, the main theme of the film about history, not living in the past, and how Indy is kind of like, I felt a bit bad for him at first because, like, you know, he was like, oh, I just want to stay here in ancient Greece with Archimedes, and, you know, Phoebe Waller-Bridge takes him back basically against his will in that moment. And I guess it's no hard feelings because he reconciles with Marion, and obviously the whole thing of it is like, you belong here, Indy, you can't sort of live in the past in history. But knowing how much history means to that character and the fact that he's there, like, living it in that moment is really, like, again, I think Ford conveys that sense of wonder really well. Like, there is a wonderful sense of just awe about him in that moment. Like, he can't believe that he is back in a time that he has spent researching so many years of his life. I thought it was really quite brilliant. Silly, perhaps? Like, as soon as you start seeing people running around in togas and with the, you know, the centurion hats and all that, helmets, hats, kind of thing, it does border on, ooh, is this a bit too much? Is this a bit too silly? I think for the most part it's handled very well, particularly how they get out of the situation when she just punches him and it's black and then he's back in New York. I'm glad that they did it that way rather than we see the whole effort of them coming back through the clouds and whatnot. So, I was not expecting to be so universally positive about this film, if I'm being completely honest. I had my expectations set quite low going in based on the previous reviews and whatnot, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I had an absolute blast with this. I already can't wait to watch it again. And yeah, if you're a fan of Indy, I highly recommend checking it out. I've seen, you know, opinions to the contrary, and I know that it won't work for everyone, but I had a fantastic time with it. I really did love this film, and I think it's a terrific closing chapter to Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones, a movie character that I just have so much fondness for, and yeah, this more than makes up for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm very happy that we have this sort of triumphant, melancholic ending as opposed to the perhaps more cartoony ending of Crystal Skull with him getting married and he's got a family and whatnot. This feels more appropriate for an Indy send-off, to me, anyway. But let me know what you think in the comments section below, and also below you can find links to my various social media pages. There's the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button if you want to stay super up-to-date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.